Nice to see you all. So I wanted to give a talk about the Dharma tonight. And I think understanding what the Dharma means in the context of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, is, I think, the most challenging. So the Dharma, as I understand it, is cosmic law. There are cosmic laws. The Dharma is a cosmic law. There are absolute principles. Dharma answers the question, how shall I live? If the two most fundamental spiritual questions are who am I and how should I live, the Dharma addresses the question of how shall I live, and it's very specific in the fact that it tells us or indicates to us or reveals to us what the most appropriate relationship to reality is. In this case, the most appropriate relationship to the body, to the mind, to time, and to the whole world, and to the universe. So that's the kind of question the Dharma proposes to answer, or does answer, if we have the ears and the heart to hear it. So the Dharma is the answer to the perennial question from the true seeker of how shall I live? Because an earnest and sincere spiritual aspirant is very eager and sincerely wants to know what is the most appropriate relationship to reality. Because the sincere spiritual aspirant, the true seeker, the individual who is at the beginning of their moment of realization, the process of realization, is in the midst of an experience of revelation. So the experience of revelation is the cognizance or the recognition that there is a highest metaphysical principle or an absolute principle that exists in reality. And reality is not flat and without depth. When we awaken, we discover that reality is pregnant with depth and verticality. So when we are in the midst of our awakening process, which can take years or lifetimes or longer, that awakening experience is very much about the recognition that there is an eternal principle, that there is a metaphysical principle that exists in reality. And that metaphysical principle that exists in reality represents what we can call the highest truth. Is there a highest truth in reality? And the Dharma says that there is a highest truth. The highest truth, of course, is the realization of enlightenment. As a higher state, as an experience, as a recognition, as a realization. And the Dharma tells us what is the most appropriate way to live the human experience in the complexity of this world of time, space, body, mind, and world. What's the most appropriate way to live the human experience, or to embrace the human experience? What's the most appropriate relationship to all the choices we have to make and actions we have to take? What's the most appropriate relationship to life, to being human, in the context of the awakening to this most highest principle, which is enlightenment, or in mythic language, God consciousness. So the Dharma is not merely the experience of higher consciousness or higher cognizance or higher knowing or revelation. The Dharma tells us, reveals to us, it's more of a revelation, that there are actually laws or principles that exist inherent in the fabric of reality itself when we begin to awaken. That the universe, that the universe, which has an inside and an outside, is not lawless and merely a random accident. And as we awaken, we discover, we recognize, we begin to experience that there seem to be cosmic laws inherent in the fabric of the universe, inherent in the fabric of reality. And these laws that I'm speaking about that have to do with the nature of the Dharma itself exist within the fabric of consciousness itself. This consciousness for those who are realizers seems to be the most foundational dimension of reality. What's the most foundational dimension to reality? The realizer says is consciousness itself. So inherent in consciousness itself, we discover, we find, we recognize, we realize, we awaken to the fact that there are these cosmic laws or cosmic principles that reveal to us what the most appropriate relationship to the challenging experience of being human is. And that's what the Dharma is all about. The Dharma answers that question for us. How shall I live? Not so much the question of who am I, but the question of how shall I live? How shall I make sense out of this? How do I make sense out of the revelation of who I am in the context of the infinite challenges of being human in an ever complexifying world space? So the Dharma tells us the answer to that question. So to repeat, the Dharma really saves us. For those of us who are desperate about being saved, not so much in the Christian sense of what it means, but saved from being lost in samsara, as the Buddha would say, lost in the world of illusion and existential confusion, and metaphysical confusion, philosophical paradoxes and contradictions. The Dharma helps us to save ourselves, to find ourselves, and it tells us very clearly how we can put one foot in front of the other in such a way that we are in alignment with these cosmic laws, with these cosmic principles. And the extraordinary thing about the Dharma, when we realize the Dharma, when we awaken to the Dharma, is just to repeat what I just said, is the discovery that these principles or these truths or these laws are available to us, inherent in the fabric of the deepest dimension of reality itself. So in order to awaken to the Dharma, to discover the Dharma for ourselves directly and intimately, we need to awaken to the deepest dimension of reality itself, awaken to consciousness. And if our awakening is deep enough, the Dharma will unfold like a flower blooming inside our hearts and minds. We will begin to see, feel, and know directly for ourselves what the way is. The way is the way of practice, the way of living a holy life, living a spiritual life, living the awakened life. Because living an awakened life, living a holy life, living a spiritually conscious life is an expression and a manifestation of higher consciousness, of God consciousness, of truth consciousness, of enlightened awareness in the world that is most of the time a sea of ignorance and confusion. So if the Dharma is something that we have awakened to and have realized and are realizing, then our life and the way that we live it becomes an expression of the deepest dimension of reality being lived consciously and deliberately. And that's very powerful. That's, I think, what we are ultimately all being called to do. And I've noticed over the years that I've been teaching that, especially in a postmodern context, which places so much postmodernity, those of us who have emerged in a cultural context that is postmodernity tend to be overwhelmed by exaggerated narcissism and self-concern, and so coming from such a narcissistic predisposition, for many of us, coming from such a narcissistic predisposition makes us very interested in personal experience and the experience of liberation, the experience of inner freedom, the experience of joy and happiness and of release and relief. I want to be happy. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy, but there's more than living a spiritual life earnestly is about more than just being happy. It's about living in truth, and as much as we're capable of it, as the truth itself, which is quite an audacious, outlandish thing to say, but it's true. Living the Dharma in earnest means we are in touch in touch with these deeper and higher dimensions of reality itself that we are manifesting through the actions we're taking and the choices that we're making. And then, as I just said, our life in the way that we live it becomes an expression of that realization. And to finish this thought, I've noticed more people tend to be focused on the who am I question than the how shall I live question. Because it's actually possible, and many people do this, in their spiritual pursuits, focus on the answer, finding the answer to the who am I question, and not necessarily struggling with how should I live question with the same vigor that they're willing to struggle with the who am I question, because the how should I live question, this question of Dharma, I think is more challenging, because you can look to find out who you are, you can look into the nature of consciousness, you can look into the nature of your own consciousness, look into the nature of the self with a capital S, and look very deeply inside yourself and begin to find some answers. But those answers, in most cases, don't necessarily force us or compel us to make very different choices in the way that we're living. And the way that we're living expresses our raison d'etre, our reason to exist. So we can find out the answer to the question, who am I, without necessarily that answer being directly associated with the answer to the question of how should I live. For some people, they work on both at the same time, or for some people, the realization of who am I directly reveals to them the Dharma, the answer to the question, how should I live? But it doesn't always work that way. So one of the most beautiful things about the Dharma in the context of non-duality, what I love about it, is that one finds that it is ultimately challenging, radically challenging to our egoic predisposition. And remember, the ego in the context of evolutionary enlightenment is both a amalgamation of personal conditioning and cultural conditioning and our personal historical experience and our cultural background has filled us with many ideas and shoulds and shouldn'ts, many superegos telling us, giving us a conscious and unconscious pictures of how life is to be lived, especially in relationship to morality and ethics. And the beautiful thing about the Dharma, when it's realized in the context of the awakening to non-duality, is that it absolutely challenges our personally conditioned egoic beliefs, conscious and unconscious, and our culturally conditioned egoic beliefs, conscious and unconscious, in quite a dramatic way. So non-duality means many things. But for the sake of this discussion, let's just call it oneness. Non-duality means one, not two. So the Dharma, in the context of the awakening to non-duality, will always reveal to us that in relationship to any particular question, should I turn left or should I turn right? Should I go forward or should I go backwards? Should I say yes or should I say no? The Dharma, in the context of the awakening to non-duality, will always tell us there's only one answer to that question. It's only one option. And the ego does not like to be backed into a corner. The ego, especially the postmodern ego, likes to have many options in relationship to challenging questions in relationship to how shall I live. It doesn't like only having one option. So the Dharma, awakening to the Dharma in the context of the emerging experience of non-dual consciousness, non-dual awareness, reveals to us in the most direct and unambiguous way that there's one way to live in truth. Of course, there's one way to live in truth, but of course, the question of what does it mean to live in truth, and that's of course what the revelation of the Dharma reveals to us in relationship to any given set of circumstances. And if you're a very sensitive person, if you're a very trusting person, if you trust in God, in other words, if you're very sincere, if you're very trusting, you trust in spirit, if you trust your own deepest spiritual impulses, if you trust your own deepest spiritual impulses, and most of us don't trust your own deepest spiritual impulses, but for those of us who do trust our own deepest spiritual impulses, the answer to the question, should I go forward, should I go backward, should I go left, should I go right, should I go up, should I go down, that answer will reveal itself in a context of subtle or not so subtle revelation. And it might last 1 second, it might last 10 seconds, it might last for a minute or two. And then it may become, the answer may become obscured by the mind and by the ego's other preferences. But if you want to know how to live the spiritual life in earnest, if you want to know how to live the spiritual life in earnest, if you're sincere about your desire to be unconditionally liberated and to live in truth, not just to talk about the truth, not just to think about the truth, but to live in truth, the awakening to this Dharmic context will reveal itself to you in a moment of clarity. Now, your ego might not like what's been revealed, but that doesn't matter. That's not the point. So remember, the Dharma answers the question of how shall I live? And in the way that I think, in the way that I teach, there's no difference ultimately between the depth of our realization and the way we live our life. To repeat, the way we live our life is an expression of our realization. So what you and I are actually doing in the lives we're choosing to live, what you and I are doing in the lives we're choosing to live, are expressions of our Dharma. The Dharma, as we understand it, can be revealed if you just look closely at our lives and the way that we're living them. So the Dharma is the revelation of the spiritual principles I was saying earlier. And we could even go so far as to say that the Dharma is a revelation of cosmic laws. And to live in truth would be to live in alignment with these cosmic laws, with these cosmic truths. And this kind of gets to be very tricky territory because our postmodern sensibilities have a lot of suspicions and fears and doubts around any kind of mythic absolute shoulds coming from any direction, even from God. And I understand it's very challenging. So on one dimension of the awakening process, one dimension of enlightenment is awakening to is consciousness. One dimension of enlightenment is about awakening to is consciousness, that everything simply is. There's no good, bad, right, wrong, true, false. No higher or nor lower. There's no here and no there, which is one perspective, which is a truth perspective. But that's not the only perspective that there is. And there's another perspective which has to do with what I'm this dharmic perspective that I'm trying to share with you tonight, which says that there is a way, the way. The most deeply realized and awakened beings throughout history, from all the great religious traditions and mystical traditions and shamanic traditions, all within the context of the awakening to higher consciousness and to the awakening to the deeper significance of philosophical and metaphysical principles. Inherent in this kind of process is the discovery that there are these profound metaphysical laws and truths inherent in the highest and deepest nature of reality itself, which is consciousness. So when we awaken, in whatever tradition it happens to be in, doesn't matter. It's becoming sensitive to and cognizant of the presence of these cosmic laws that seem to exist inherent in the fabric of the universe. And I know that sounds pretty crazy for a materialist. But just because it sounds crazy doesn't mean it isn't true. I can't prove to you that it's true. But my own experience tells me that it's true. And it's all I can share with you is what I know from my own experience. And so this is very important because this reveals to us that the universe is awake with sentience, awake with intelligence. Not in the anthropomorphic sense of what that means, but in a deeper and more mysterious sense of what it means. The universe is awake, the universe is conscious. There's intelligence, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's direction, there's context. And there are moral principles inherent in this experience of life that have a divine origin. And if you realize this is true, if you experience levels of insight that reveals this kind of thing to be true, it won't save your soul necessarily in an instant. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. It won't necessarily save your soul in an instant, but it will give you confidence that the universe is a worthy place to be. That the universe is a worthy place to be in. The universe is a process that is it's a process that you want to be part of, because it's not meaningless or purposeless or directionless or random. Quite the opposite. So what I would encourage everybody to do would be to in the next couple of days, as you're meditating, assuming that you do meditate, I hope you do. You should be. You want to consider the life you're living and why you're living your life in the way that you are, and to become clear about which metaphysical and spiritual and dharmic principles are guiding the choices you're making and the actions that you're taking, are guiding your life process, your karmic destiny. And see if you feel that the deep choices that you're making, conscious and unconscious, are in alignment with a deep revelation to the absolute nature of reality. Are you living in alignment with your own deepest revelation, with its absolute principles, with the nature of reality itself? Or are you living by a mind that's been driven by other people's ideas from a culture that's gone mad anyway? Beautiful thing about all this is you see we're not alone in the universe. We're not alone in the universe, and that's why I've always liked in Buddhism, they talk about the way, the Buddhist path speaks about the way, the Eightfold Path, etc. And many of the Eastern traditions talk about the way. Or in Chinese Dharma, you have the Tao. But they're all telling us that there is a way to live in alignment with reality at the deepest level. There's a way to live in alignment with reality at the deepest level. And just the fact that we know that there is a way to live in alignment with reality at the deepest level means that this highest principle, this God principle, actually exists. And just knowing that this God principle actually exists and is real can be a source of tremendous faith for us, a tremendous relief that we're not alone, and that materialism is a lie. It's a big relief, I think. It is for me. Has been for a long time and continues to be. Doesn't mean it's easy to live the spiritual life, but it means that the spiritual life is real. There is such a thing. There's such a thing as living a conscious life. That if it's deeply conscious, it's lived in alignment with these higher and deeper principles. It means that the spiritual life means something in and of itself. To live a spiritual life is to live a spiritually conscious life. To live a spiritually earnest life has inherent meaning, inherent value. And as I'm fond of saying, that the universe we see is trying to evolve at the deepest levels through us as we aspire to live more consciously. So in this way, we can begin to feel this momentum exists in the cosmos, this spiritual momentum towards greater consciousness and depth and knowing and consciousness. Now, in what I call the new Dharma, or the evolutionary Dharma, these Dharmic principles become directly aligned with the evolutionary impulse. When the Dharma meets evolutionary theory, the Dharma is impacted by it. The Dharma then becomes an expression of this new information about the ultimate nature of reality. And now we've discovered that the universe is an evolutionary process that's going somewhere. It seems to be in a process of infinite complexification and striving for greater interiority. And as I'm fond of saying, when we awaken in the evolutionary context, we realize I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe, awakening to itself and realizing itself through the body, mind, and personality of, in this case, Andrew, or any one of us. So when that dawns on you, in the context of the Dharma, it becomes clear to you that as you realize who you are in a context of conscious evolution, that bestows upon you an obligation to become an expression of an evolutionary process of becoming conscious of itself through you, as you, in this world of confusion and chaos. So then, awaken to this evolutionary context in the context of the Dharma means, as you've awakened to the truth of who you are as an evolutionary process, as part and parcel of an evolutionary process, the Dharma, having this awakening in the context of the Dharma, compels you to embrace a level of personal responsibility for who you truly are in a very confused and lost world space. Because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? So the Dharmic context of the awakening to evolution creates a moral imperative that you will realize if you go deep enough into your own awakening to consciousness, especially in this evolutionary context, you will discover when your ego is temporarily taking a nap that there's a moral context to your own awakening, and you awaken to the evolutionary impulse itself, which means there is a need for you to step forward and be an evolutionary. That becomes part of your Dharma. It's the command that you realize it comes from the Dharma, it becomes part of your own Dharma. It's to become an evolutionary, a conscious evolutionary. And if you're going to become a conscious evolutionary in the context of awakening to the Dharma, that's going to put an awful lot of spiritual fire under your backside. Because if you're a conscious evolutionary, it means there's no excuse for being stuck. Because if you're an evolutionary, you are evolution incarnate, at least in theory. So someone who's evolving, someone who's growing, someone who's in a state of conscious becoming is alive and awake and turned on and inspired because they're connected to the energy and intelligence of the evolutionary impulse. They're vibrating with it. They're turned on by life and by the gift of life and by the gift of being able to contribute to all this emerging complexity and miraculous potential. So that's very exciting, very life positive, absolute position to take in relationship to life. That's an expression of the higher consciousness that awakening to evolution is. So awakening to evolution in the context of the Dharma means taking responsibility for what it means to know who you are. Because you realize that you're not alone in this, that you're existing in an interconnected field of relatedness and relationship. We're all together and very few people are awake. So few people are awake, so it becomes part of your dharmic duty to be awake, to act like you're awake, to take responsibility for what it means to be awake in the context of evolution. So you see, the Dharma can help us to find the answers to the question of, wait, what should I do? Where should I go? How should I do this? Should I go forward, backward, up or down, left or right? It can help you to find out the answer to that question for yourself, which is important. It will also tell you, reveal to you, how to put yourself front and center in the most spiritually potent, spiritually profound, spiritually meaningful way in relationship to the life experience you find yourself in the midst of now. How can I live my life in the way that's most constructive, the most spiritually constructive way possible? How can I live my life in the way that's the most spiritually meaningful, the most spiritually meaningful way possible? Now. Because the Dharma reveals to us not what your ego wants. The Dharma reveals to us not what our ego wants, what somebody else's ego wants. It reveals what Spirit wants. I would love the idea. What does Spirit want from me now? What an audacious thought, what an audacious idea. It's not it's not what my ego wants, but what does Spirit want from me? If I was available. Most of us aren't available because we're very busy with our personal karmas and our egoic distractions, fears and desires. But if we were available, if just so happens we were available, what would be the most appropriate response to the opportunity that this life is giving us right now? And for this, we want to look to the Dharma, because the Dharma will answer that question for us. And remember, as I've been saying, it's not necessarily what your ego thinks it wants. Surprise, surprise. Because remember, I was saying before, awakening to Dharma in the context of non-duality. Non-duality means there's only one. Awakening to Dharma in the context of non-duality means there's only one. Which means there's only one answer to that question in the context of the Dharma. And answering that question with a full-hearted, courageous, committed response is how Spirit becomes empowered to change the world. It means you have to leave the small life of the small self behind and have to step forward into the infinite life of the authentic self, the true self. Then you become an expression of the Dharma in action. Wow. You're not hiding out anymore. So the Dharma is the way. And what's so beautiful about it is the way means one way. It means there's one way, the right way, versus the wrong way. And this is what the ego finds so hard to come to terms with. But of course, the true self and the authentic self delight in this kind of absolute revelation. Oh, I see, life can become so simple, so direct, so immediate, so obvious, so perfectly obvious. And if you're living in the truth as the truth, or if you're aspiring to live in the truth as the truth, in all humility and sincerity, you will feel safe and you'll feel protected. Because you'll feel you're living right on the razor's edge, between here and there and everywhere. That's the gift of living in light of the Dharma. So the Dharma is the way, it's law, truthfulness, righteousness, justice. It's possible for those words to actually mean something important to us at a soul level if we have the spiritual courage to let go of our minds and egos. So we can live and learn to know what it means to live in truth, and even in righteousness, not self-righteousness, living in truth. So if we can learn how to put one step in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, in light of the awakening to the Dharma, in the way that I've been trying to describe, patiently, one foot after the other, you'll feel that you are, at a certain point, it'll become clear to you that you're living in truth, that you are living in truth. And that's what's protecting you. If you learn how to make the right choices consistently, you'll find that you continue to live in the truth. And the more that you continue to live in the truth, the more you'll feel protected by that truth, by the Dharma itself. You'll feel on safe ground because you're living in alignment with this highest truth of life. And this is all possible to do all this. That's the whole point of living a spiritual life, as I understand it. This is the whole point. So if you live in alignment with these deeper spiritual principles, which is what the Dharma is, to repeat, you will find that you feel protected. This is very subtle what I'm saying, but it's very profound and it happens to be true. So does anybody have any any questions?
Please write your question in the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom window.
So Danielle, did anybody have any questions, or are we good?
No, there is one.
Okay.
From Sitske, and she is asking, it is all about to make the right choices, I understand. What if I have not learned to make choices?
And it's time to start learning now. No time to waste.
You can unmute yourself, Sitske. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm learning every day, constant. But
Good.
if I do it the right way.
That's what we all have to do every day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Then Adam says, I have a question about my process of awakening.
Okay.
Yes, I've been experiencing in my life lately more serenity and peace than I've ever had, and deeper connection to what we call divine presence. And it also seems very paradoxical for me because this is deepening, that this connection and this understanding and inner knowing of the source of my being, the power source that generates all life. And what seems very paradoxical for me is that I also have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And it seems like it's an antagonist against all of that. It's like, it feels like there's this separate entity that has its own program ingrained in me that does not want to let go. So in this deepening process, it seems like it wants to fight back stronger, where there's a lot of fear and even terror. And oftentimes, I don't know to what degree it's something that has to do with intergenerational trauma, it's neurobiological, or it's just a metaphysical, spiritual process that I have to go through. I was just wondering if you have any, comments or suggestions to make about that.
Well, what I would encourage you to do would be since you have this beautiful awakening process going on, which you described, you have something to work with, which is the overwhelming positivity of the spiritual awakening. So what I would do if I were you, and this is what I practice in my own life, is to give much more attention to the pure positivity that's coming from the spiritual awakening, and make the deliberate effort to concentrate more on that and to give it more significance. And when these conditioned, habitual, painful, emotional, psychological responses that maybe were related to some kind of traumatic events in the past, when they start to surface, you have to make the spiritually heroic determination not to be victimized by it, and to choose to let go of the experience, even if it's very painful and very challenging. So you don't want to focus on how bad it feels or how much stress it's causing you, but you want to because you want to be free, spiritually free, you choose not to identify with it and to use all of your spiritual training to make the effort to let go of all the suffering, not to identify with the suffering, to let go of the suffering, and to refuse to be a victim. And no matter what happens, to let it go, which means no matter what happens, to let it go. Be sure no matter what happens to let it go, because the ego likes to make a big drama out of all of its problems. So the ego likes to make these conditioned emotional reactions that may be actually based upon real painful traumatic events. It likes to dwell on them, likes to make a big drama out of them. And sometimes these events are dramatic. But I'm saying, for the person in the context of this teacher that wants to be free more than anything else, we have to use all of our spiritual training courageously to make the effort to let go of all the suffering and to let go of our attachment to the suffering, and to suffer, if need be, to suffer with patience and a measure of self-compassion mixed with a lot of stoicism. Because the main thing, I forgot what your name is. What did you say?
Adam.
The main thing, Adam, is not to get lost in the drama of your ego.
Yeah.
Because the ego likes to make a drama out of its own suffering, to repeat. So you want to refuse to get drawn into the drama that your ego is making out of the event. And the more you can let go of the drama, the more you can let go of the suffering and calm down, and remind yourself to calm down and not to get caught up in it, not to get trapped by it. It will begin to trouble you less, but you have to be willing to fight the good fight for this. You have to be willing to practice self-compassion mixed with a lot of stoicism. Then you can do it. But yeah, which is because the ultimate solution to all of these kinds of events is, in the end, is letting go, is conscious letting go. Not even trying to get over it or trying to get beyond it, or trying to solve it or even trying to understand it. Just letting go of it with patience, self-compassion, and stoicism, stoic inspiration. And also, you have to believe in the greater reality of your own true self, your own authentic self. And to see all of these painful events are happening in the context of the life of your ego. It doesn't mean they're unreal. It just means they're only relatively real. They don't have as much validity or authenticity as the realm of the true self, the authentic self. And use your practice of meditation and your conviction in your capacity to awaken to enlightened awareness as a source of strength. And be committed to succeeding. Which means we have to be strong. We have to be strong and committed to a very positive outcome. And once again, to repeat, not to refuse to be a victim, no matter what.
It's beautiful. One thing I wanted to add was that oftentimes, or sometimes, it feels like at the core of this, what I see is that there's this slowly dissolving of identity, but of what I'm calling, or what's defined as OCD. It's like it's taken on an identity of its own because it's not want to let go. And what I experience is that at the core of this, there's a grief. There's a grief in the sense that all of my false identities are dying, but there's a point where I'm not even sure if it's my identity. It's just the identity collectively of human beings as being something that we're not is dissolving. And I think that fear and that grief is going together with a matter of just I'm mourning the loss of what I taken on as my own, which never really was. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It just it makes sense, but we don't want to get too lost in too much complexity. I'm sure what you're saying is actually true.
Yeah.
But from a higher level, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And it'll only not really matter if you believe that it doesn't matter, which is I'm not advocating spiritual bypassing. I'm advocating intentional, self-loving, self-adoring, deliberate transcendence. Because the thing is, Adam, we all have a past, and if you believe in the continuity of consciousness, we've all lived many lives and suffered enormously, and there's infinite chain reactions going on. They're all wrapped up in these karmic bubbles. And at a certain point, as my guru said to me, he said, Andrew, as nirvana has no beginning and no end, so also samsara has no beginning and no end. So at a certain point of our spiritual process, awakening process, we want to let go of the whole story if we have the courage to do it. Just because we want to let go of the whole story and intend to let go of the whole story doesn't mean the whole story is going to disappear. It doesn't mean that's where we're standing. That's the spiritual ground we're standing on. Not to bypass anything, but because we don't want to be involved in human experience in that way anymore. So we want to trust the deeper and more authentic part of ourself for our salvation, not any kind of psychological understanding or processing anymore. That's what I do anyway. But it takes a lot of courage. Is there anything else? Thank you,
Yep.
Adam.
The next question is from Marilyn. She is asking, would you say the Dharma is absolute or is it evolving as we are evolving?
Both. It's both absolute and evolving, because in evolutionary Dharma, we realize that God is evolving as we're evolving. So yes, the absolute is evolving. That's what's the miraculous part of evolutionary Dharma, is to realize the absolute as the creative process as a whole is evolving. If the creative process, if the evolutionary process is in a process of evolution, that means the absolute is evolving. Also means God is evolving. So the answer is yes, it's absolute, and also it's evolving because the absolute is evolving. And that's part of the new Dharma, the new understanding of the Dharma, which means God is in a process of growth, greater complexification. We're part of it, you're part of it, which is a wonderful thing to realize. The only part of God that's not evolving is what's called the ground of being, or what the Buddha called the unborn, or the uncreated, or the unmanifest. So the unborn, the uncreated, and the unmanifest is static, eternal being, where there's no coming, there's no going, there's no birth, there's no death, there's no becoming. But God is both being and becoming. So the becoming part of the equation is in a state of constant complexification and growth. And your body, mind, and personality and your soul are part of that side of the equation. So God is manifest becoming. It's what we all are as manifest human beings. And in that we are definitely part of an evolutionary process, which God is also, which I think is good news. What's helpful when having this kind of discussion is the metaphysical contemplation of the relationship between our metaphysical and intellectual grasp and philosophical grasp of a word like infinite, and evolution at the same time. Infinite, that which is infinite is also growing. And it's something that we need to think about, spend time contemplating too, so we can order to get to experience it, to feel it, to kind of get a sense of what it means. That which is infinite is also growing and evolving instead of becoming more of what it can be. And then when you realize that your own desire for conscious evolution is a part of that process of cosmic evolution, of the evolution of the creative principle, of the God principle, and that's what you're experiencing. You're experiencing that vibration as your own desire to become more conscious, or to become enlightened. That's very exciting, because then you realize that God wants to become enlightened through you. And I can't imagine anything more exciting than that. Can you? I don't think so.
I have one more question, Andrew.
Okay.
From Rodney. When you mentioned that living in alignment with truth, you are protected, my ego thought about safety, and my true self, as I experienced it, thought about protection from losing my way. How do you sort this out?
You say that again, please?
When you mentioned that living in alignment with truth, you are protected, my ego thought about safety, and my true self thought about protection from losing my way. How do you sort this out?
You don't have to. Well, you no need to sort it out. Just if you experience the truth of what I'm saying, then experience the tremendous grace in the answer. The significance of what it means is very profound. It's very powerful. It means that God exists. It means that there's this divine principle that exists in the universe. And the more you're awake to it, and the more you live in alignment with it, you are protected in a mysterious metaphysical sense. It's very subtle, but yet very profound at the same time. And doesn't need to be sorted out. It just needs to be understood or grasped or felt or recognized, even for a second. There's nothing to be done with it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's a retrospective insight. It's not a static insight. It's not a gross form of protection. It's a very subtle form of protection. But this protection is the recognition that you're on the right path. That you're going in the right direction for the right reasons at the right time. And it means something. It's part of the evolution of spirit itself, really, in the way that I was describing it.
You've given more meaning to the sense of what I meant by not losing my way. It was saying what you're saying in a negative as opposed to a positive way, which
Exactly.
you said.
Yeah, exactly. And the ego will never see this, what I'm describing. The ego can't see it. It's only your true self can recognize it, your authentic self can recognize it in retrospect.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
That was the last question, Andrew.
Very good. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Yes, thank you.